There comes a point in every long career when quiet endurance turns into something heavier. Not anger. Not hatred. Just a tired honesty that can no longer be buried. For Jason Statham, that moment didn't arrive with a public meltdown or a fiery interview. It came slowly, like pressure building in a sealed room. Years of smiling for cameras, years of nodding through uncomfortable moments, years of choosing professionalism over truth quietly took their toll. Jason Statham has always been the type of actor who lets his work speak. He built his reputation through discipline, physical precision, and a no-nonsense approach to filmmaking. No flashy scandals. No dramatic tabloid headlines. Just long hours, bruised knuckles, and the kind of dedication that doesn't make noise but earns respect. But even the most controlled people reach a point where silence feels heavier than speaking. Over time, Statham began to see patterns in the industry that slowly chipped away at his patience. Not dramatic battle scenes or shouting matches, but subtle behaviors that poisoned the atmosphere behind the scenes, egos that grew too large, priorities that drifted away from storytelling, and a culture that rewarded chaos more than consistency. One of the names often discussed in quiet industry conversations is Mark Wahlberg. They worked together on The Italian Job, a film remembered fondly by audiences. On the surface, everything looked smooth. Interviews were friendly. Promotions were polished. But behind closed doors, there were very different energies at play. Statham has always valued full focus on the work. Being present. Being prepared. Respecting the crew. For him, the set was sacred space, not a marketplace for business calls or side deals. At that time, Wahlberg was expanding beyond acting. Building brands. Launching businesses. Negotiating deals. Many admired that ambition. But from Statham's perspective, there was a growing divide between commitment to the story and attention pulled elsewhere. It wasn't one major blow-up. It was quiet frustration, waiting for someone to arrive, resetting scenes, watching focus drift. Over time, it felt less like teamwork and more like compromise after compromise. What hurt most wasn't personality. It was values. Statham comes from a background rooted in discipline, sports, and precision. To him, showing up fully mattered more than status, image, or side empires. And that realization stayed with him long after filming ended. Another name that has often surfaced through industry whispers is Jared Leto. Their professional paths never fully crossed, but they came close. Early meetings, informal conversations, early creative discussions, moments where chemistry is usually built. But those moments turned strange. Statham walked into what he expected to be a simple creative discussion. Script talk. Character exploration. Normal collaboration. Instead, he found himself sitting across from someone who didn't separate real life from performance. Leto reportedly stayed in character. Refused ordinary conversation. Avoided normal human interaction. Everything felt theatrical, heavy, and staged. For some, that approach is seen as dedication. But for Statham, it felt like confusion disguised as artistic depth. He believed acting happens when the cameras roll, not in a coffee shop. For him, respect meant clarity. Leto's style felt invasive, as if everyone in the room was unknowingly forced to participate in a performance they never auditioned for. That experience planted a seed of discomfort. Not hatred. Not rivalry. Just a realization that not all talent works the same way. Some actors want the spotlight even when the cameras are off. Others quietly wait for their moment and execute with precision. Then there was Shia LaBeouf, or at least the possibility of working together. Industry discussions. Studio interest. But Statham, like many veterans, watches patterns. He had seen the headlines. The unpredictable interviews. The public breakdowns. The stories from sets. Where some saw passion and artistic struggle, Statham saw risk. He isn't someone who thrives in chaos. He believes filmmaking is like a machine, each part must work smoothly for the whole thing to succeed. He feared that emotional unpredictability could derail not just performance, but entire productions. According to people familiar with these early talks, messages were exchanged that left a sour taste. Nothing explosive, but something unprofessional enough to confirm Statham's concerns. It wasn't about talent. It was about reliability. He never wanted to be in the position of managing someone else's emotional storms while trying to build a film. To him, art wasn't about self-destruction. It was about self-control. Another name that seems to carry a different kind of emotional weight is Steven Seagal. This wasn't born from personal hatred, but from disappointment. Statham comes from a real combat background. Years of physical training. Real discipline. Real sacrifice. When he performs a fight scene, there is muscle memory behind it. Seagal, once celebrated as a martial arts icon, had developed a reputation that many found difficult to reconcile with reality. Exaggerated stories. Inflated self-image. Unrealistic screen portrayals. To Statham, this wasn't entertaining. It felt dishonest. He admired real legends like Bruce Lee, men who built their reputations through visible dedication. Seeing someone claim similar status without visible effort felt disrespectful. It wasn't jealousy. It was disappointment in what action cinema had become at times, less about struggle, more about fantasy invincibility. Statham always believed audiences deserve believability. Characters should bleed. Struggle. Feel real pain. That is where tension lives. Where emotion lives. Watching a character drift through fights untouched felt lazy to him, a betrayal of the genre. But perhaps the tension that felt most personal over the years involved Vin Diesel. This wasn't speculation. This was something the audience sensed through whispers, interviews, and body language. During the Fast and Furious era, particularly with Hobbs and Shaw, energy behind the camera felt different from what showed up on screen. Statham respected The Rock. Professional rhythm. Timing. Mutual effort. But when it came to Diesel, the atmosphere shifted. Long waits. Rewrites. Scene adjustments. Control struggles. Reports of rising tension. Statham is not a man who enjoys wasting time. And when time was lost repeatedly, frustration grew quietly. Industry insiders have long suggested that Diesel was protective of his on-screen dominance. For Statham, this wasn't about ego, it was about story balance. No character should outweigh the narrative. Films are a team sport. When control overtakes collaboration, the project suffers. When Statham finally allowed his frustration to surface publicly, it stunned people not because it was aggressive, but because it was calm. His honesty didn't come from rage. It came from exhaustion. The type that only builds after decades of forced smiles. But what mattered most was not the names. It was the meaning behind them. Each name reflected a fracture he had quietly carried. Ego. Distraction. Instability. Illusion. Control. These weren't attacks. They were lessons. Wounds that shaped how he saw his industry. A man who stayed silent so long because he believed professionalism meant swallowing discomfort. Statham never claimed to be perfect. He never claimed moral superiority. He simply showed what happens when someone who values discipline spends years navigating an environment that often celebrates chaos. Hollywood thrives on images. But behind those images are human beings. Tensions. Unsaid words. Compromises that don't show up on camera. If you've watched Statham's films, you've seen the discipline. The control. The precision. What this story reveals is the unseen cost of maintaining that standard in a world that doesn't always respect it. It's not about drama. It's about truth carried quietly for too long. And when silence finally breaks, it doesn't explode. It breathes.